In today's video, we're diving into 5 horrifying pets that ate their owners right in front of everyone. From a tiger mauling that ended with a body half-eaten, to a lady convinced her gorilla possessed human-level empathy before being beaten to death. But first, let's travel to the remote wilderness of New Mexico, where one man's dream of creating a sanctuary would become his ultimate nightmare. It was September 14, 2017, under the harsh New Mexico sun outside Ruidoso Down. At a makeshift sanctuary behind rusted gates, the sounds of children's laughter would soon be replaced by screams as Nina, a 200-pound black jaguar, shattered the illusion of safety that Tyler Qualls had carefully constructed. Tyler was a 46-year-old retired Army medic who had returned from 2 tours in Iraq with shattered nerves and a deep mistrust of civilization. His father's death had left him 6 acres of desert land, which he gradually turned into what he called the micro-sanctuary. The property housed 2 bobcats, a few rescued reptiles, and Nina, the jaguar he considered the crown jewel of his operation. Tyler had purchased Nina from a Texas breeder 2 years earlier, paying in cash and transporting her across state lines in a modified horse trailer. He often said his military background gave him intuitive respect for apex predators, claiming he didn't need formal training. He ran the place alone, no staff, no protocols, no emergency barriers. He rejected tranquilizers and carried no firearm. His solution to danger was confidence, which he believed animals could sense. Once a month, Tyler hosted open house days, low-key events advertised through local forums and word of mouth. Visitors were allowed close-up views of the animals from behind standard chain-link fences. Tyler would lead casual tours barefoot, speaking about natural balance, trust, and how fear is what gets people hurt. His self-printed brochures mentioned animal welfare but omitted any legal disclaimers or real warnings. On the morning of September 14th, 11 visitors arrived, including a couple from Albuquerque with 2 children, a tourist group from Arizona, and 3 local residents. By 10 a.m., they had gathered near Nina's enclosure, a 20 by 30 foot space enclosed by chain-link fencing and shaded by a salvaged metal carport. The guests took photos as Tyler talked about Nina's diet, daily behavior, and his belief that she saw him as family. Unbeknownst to the guests, Nina had been showing troubling behavior for several days. Tyler's veterinarian friend, who occasionally stopped by to check the animals, had warned him the jaguar might be entering pre-estrus, a hormonal phase where big cats become more territorial, aggressive, and unpredictable. Tyler brushed it off, saying that she's moody, not dangerous. But wild behavior doesn't disappear in captivity. Captive jaguars retain the same instincts as their wild counterparts, and pre-estrus only amplifies their sensitivity to any perceived intrusion or competition. By 10:30 a.m., Tyler decided to demonstrate his bond with Nina. With a bucket of raw chicken in one hand, he unlatched the enclosure gate and stepped inside, barefoot as always. He waved off concerns from guests, saying that Nina knows him. He turned his back to pour food into the trough, and that's when it happened. Nina had been crouched behind a boulder near the enclosure's rear wall. Her posture was low, ears flat, eyes locked on her target. She didn't growl, she didn't snarl, she lunged. 200 pounds of muscular predator closed the 10-foot distance in a second. Her claws struck first, tearing through Tyler's side and spinning him off balance. Her jaws clamped down on his lower back, targeting the pelvis. A loud crack echoed through the enclosure, his spine fracturing under the bite force. Tyler collapsed, screaming, legs motionless. Nina didn't hesitate. She gripped his limp body and dragged it behind the boulder. Blood stained the sand as she disappeared from view. The guests outside froze. One woman screamed. A man fumbled for his phone. But no one could enter the enclosure. There was no secondary gate, no lockout zone, no way to intervene. The 911 call came at 10:34 a.m. The dispatcher recorded multiple overlapping voices, most describing a man being dragged and mauled by a large black cat. Emergency responders arrived at 10:52 a.m. They found Nina crouched over Tyler's body, her muzzle red, her ears forward, posture stiff. She stood as the officers approached the gate, displaying classic defensive behavior. When she stepped forward baring her teeth, she was shot twice through the head with a .308 caliber rifle. Inside the enclosure, the scene was gruesome. Tyler's skull had been crushed, likely from a single bite by Nina's canines. Deep puncture wounds marked his back and legs, and his torso showed signs of feeding behavior. Claw marks stretched from his hip to his ribs. The ground beneath him was soaked in blood. The investigation determined that Tyler died within minutes of the initial attack. The spinal injury had paralyzed him instantly, and blood loss from multiple arterial wounds proved fatal. There was no sign of disease in Nina, no sedatives or stimulants, no evidence of provocation. She had simply acted on instinct. The enclosure met minimum state requirements but had no redundancy. It had blind spots, no reinforced barrier between the animal and caretaker, and no emergency plan in place. Authorities concluded that the attack was preventable, not because Nina behaved unnaturally, but because Tyler had ignored basic safety measures. Tyler's remains were cremated. His sister, a schoolteacher from Las Cruces, organized a small service attended by a few of Tyler's former Army colleagues. The ceremony was held at a veteran center with a photo of Tyler in uniform placed next to a folded American flag. No one spoke publicly about the Jaguar. Within a month, the sanctuary was disbanded. The 2 bobcats were relocated to a licensed wildlife center in Colorado. The fencing was taken down, the structures dismantled, and the land put up for sale. State officials closed the investigation quietly. No charges were filed, since Tyler had not technically violated any enforceable statute. New Mexico had no comprehensive regulation on big cat ownership at the time. In the end, the state labeled the event an isolated incident. But as the desert witnessed another self-proclaimed animal whisperer's fatal overconfidence with a jaguar hundreds of miles away in Georgia, a lady would discover that years of backdoor bonding meant nothing when a gorilla's territorial instincts finally override human delusions. It was June 2nd, 2015. The air heavy in Calhoun as string lights glowed softly over a quiet backyard gathering. Neighbors and former students mingled around folding tables laden with potato salad and sweet tea, unaware that their host, Trish Bolin, was about to lead them toward a tragedy that would unfold in seconds but haunt them forever. Trish was a 53-year-old former high school science teacher who had channeled her grief over her husband's death 6 years earlier into an obsession with primatology. Her modest ranch home had become an unofficial educational center, where she hosted library lectures and property tours centered around her prized possession, Rafi, a 400-pound male silverback gorilla she had acquired through questionable permit loopholes in 2009. Trish had convinced herself that Rafi, hand-raised from infancy, possessed human-level empathy and could be controlled through modified sign language and routine care. She dismissed the warnings of friends who noticed his increasingly aggressive behavior, the object throwing, the territorial charging, the refusal to respond to commands. These were classic signs of a mature male gorilla asserting dominance, behaviors that in the wild would establish his position within the troop hierarchy, and she was blind to it. The custom-built outbuilding where Rafi lived featured steel framing and double doors, but Trish's deadly flaw was her belief that barriers were unnecessary between her and her roommate. She routinely entered his enclosure without protective barriers, a practice that violated every USDA recommendation for primate handling. Her confidence in their bond had blinded her to the fundamental truth that gorillas, regardless of their upbringing, remain wild animals with instincts shaped by millions of years of evolution. That evening, as the cookout wound down, Trish offered her guests a tour they would never forget. 8 people followed her across the backyard to meet Rafi, who stood silently behind the mesh door, his dark eyes tracking their movement. What they witnessed next would shatter any illusions about the gentle nature of captive primates. Trish entered the enclosure carrying a crate of ripe peaches, Rafi's favorite treat. She attempted to demonstrate their communication through sign language, but Rafi remained unresponsive, a warning sign she chose to ignore. Then, in a moment of fatal overconfidence, she reached toward him to show his tactile trust. The primate took this differently. Adult male gorillas are 10 times stronger than humans, with 8-foot arm spans and the ability to lift over 4,000 pounds. Though not naturally aggressive, a single blow can shatter ribs, and their 1,300 psi bite can crush a skull instantly. In an instant, Rafi struck her across the chest with a single open-handed blow that sent her crashing to the floor. Before she could recover, he advanced, the dominant male asserting his authority. His 400-pound frame came down on her torso with crushing force, each step breaking ribs and collapsing organs. The horror escalated as Rafi grabbed Trish by the jaw, his massive hands easily encompassing her head. With one powerful bite, he removed part of her face. His canine teeth, designed to strip bark and crush tough vegetation, tearing through flesh and bone with terrifying efficiency. The guests fled in panic, their screams echoing across the suburban neighborhood as they witnessed the brutal reality of primate power. A neighbor that heard their screams dialed 911. When law enforcement arrived 12 minutes later, they found Rafi standing motionless over Trish's body. Not aggressive, but alert, displaying the calm dominance of a silverback who had successfully defended his territory. Unaware that a dangerous animal was present, they waited for another 10 minutes for animal control to arrive. Eventually, a tranquilizer dart ended the standoff, but it was far too late for Trish. Her skull was crushed, her upper torso torn open by the immense force of Rafi's attack. The scattered peaches around her body served as a grim reminder of the trust she had placed in a creature whose nature she had fundamentally misunderstood. Rafi was euthanized the following morning, a decision made without protest or petition. Trish's family declined interviews and only a small obituary appeared in the local paper, noting her background as an educator and longtime advocate for primate care. The investigation revealed multiple violations dating back years: incomplete behavior logs, improper enclosure procedures, and lack of veterinary oversight. The property was sold, the outbuilding demolished, leaving only bureaucratic footnotes to mark the end of Trish Boland's misguided dream. While Trish's misplaced faith in her companion would soon turn a backyard demonstration into a nightmare, thousands of miles away in the rugged landscape of Wyoming, a man's confidence in his bond with a lion was about to be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. It was November 16, 2013, the Wyoming wind slicing across the plains near Cody, as a Barbary lion paced behind rusted bars in a half-acre of makeshift enclosures. Just past noon, Derek Pruitt stepped through the gate carrying a tray of raw venison, unaware that his years of reckless confidence were about to meet their violent end. Derek Pruitt was a 38-year-old former rodeo star whose fearless reputation on the bronc riding circuit had been built on calculated risks and split-second timing. When a career-ending injury forced his retirement, he channeled that same dangerous confidence into exotic animal ownership, converting old rodeo panels into enclosures on his property outside Cody. His centerpiece was Jax, a 500-pound Barbary lion he had acquired as a cub and raised to adulthood over 3 years. Barbary lions, extinct in the wild but still bred in captivity, are apex predators weighing up to 550 pounds, with 2-inch claws, a 650 psi bite, and hunting instincts that remain sharp even when hand-raised. As males mature, they grow more territorial, powerful, and dangerously unpredictable. Derek's approach to lion handling was built on dangerous misconceptions. His philosophy centered on dominance through calmness, believing that lions could sense human emotions and respond to confidence with submission. He regularly entered Jax's enclosure without protective barriers, hand-feeding the massive predator and walking the perimeter with nothing but a stick for protection. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Jax had been exhibiting classic stress behaviors, pacing at odd hours, refusing food for days, showing increased agitation during routine interactions. These behavioral changes are common in captive lions experiencing hormonal fluctuations or territorial stress, often preceding aggressive episodes. But Derek dismissed these red flags as winter laziness, his overconfidence blinding him to the danger signals that any trained animal behaviorist would have recognized immediately. On Thanksgiving weekend, his 14-year-old nephew Bryce had come by to help with feeding, as he often did. The enclosure's safety vestibule meant to protect direct contact was bypassed as always. Derek insisted Jax knew him too well to ever pose a threat. At 12:04 p.m., Derek entered the lion's pen carrying venison quarters. The lion lay still in the corner, watching. Derek called his usual greeting and turned his back to approach the feeding platform. That single act, turning away, was all it took. Without a sound, Jax rose and closed the distance in 2 strides. He struck with blinding speed, raking his forepaws across Derek's back and slamming him to the ground. Bryce screamed, frozen just outside the fence, as Jax clamped his jaws around Derek's neck and shook violently. The lion's bite, designed to crush windpipes and snap vertebrae, did exactly that. Derek kicked weakly for a few seconds, but Jax remained locked in, eyes fixed, unmoving. The animal's instincts had overtaken years of hand-rearing and familiarity. Bryce grabbed a metal rake and shouted, striking the bars. Jax didn't flinch. The 911 call came at 12:07 p.m. Bryce, voice shaking, told the dispatcher about the incident. When deputies arrived at 12:18, Jax was still hovering over Derek's mangled body. Officers fired a single shot, killing the lion instantly. Derek was pronounced dead on scene. His injuries matched a classic big cat takedown. Crushed cervical vertebrae, deep claw marks across his spine, and puncture wounds through the throat. The untouched tray of venison nearby made one thing clear: Jax hadn't attacked for food. He had responded to instinct, territorial, sudden, and final. A small funeral was held on the outskirts of Amarillo, attended by a few family members, 2 former rodeo friends, and a wildlife officer who had known Derek from inspection visits. There were no speeches, just silence, wind, and a closed casket. Bryce received trauma counseling. Derek's remaining animals were relocated, and the enclosure was dismantled within weeks. State officials quietly tightened exotic animal ownership regulations, closing the loopholes Derek had exploited. And as a lion claimed another victim in Wyoming who had mistaken familiarity for safety, the dense forest of California would soon witness a retired chef's final birthday celebration turn into a blood-soaked nightmare involving a black bear. It was May 22, 2016, light filtering through the pines above Oakhurst as guests gathered behind Mario DeLuca's cabin for cake and quiet celebration. No one noticed the massive black shape in the tree line, until Mario, spotting it with a grin, raised his phone and remarked that it would make a great photo, words that would be among his last. Mario was a 61-year-old retired chef who had traded the chaos of Modesto restaurant kitchens for what he called simple living close to nature on his wooded parcel near Yosemite. However, his dream of harmony with the wilderness had manifested in the most dangerous way possible, through his relationship with Bobo, a 400-pound black bear he had raised from a cub and allowed to roam freely around his property. Mario's approach to bear management was built on dangerous misconceptions that would prove fatal. He believed Bobo was practically vegetarian, feeding him fruit, bread, and even beer while allowing the massive predator to wander freely between his property and the surrounding wilderness. This habituation, the process by which wild animals lose their natural fear of humans, is one of the most dangerous scenarios in wildlife management. Habituated bears become unpredictable, viewing humans as sources of food rather than threats to avoid. Additionally, Despite their seemingly docile reputation, black bears are incredibly powerful omnivores capable of running 30 miles per hour and climbing trees with ease. Their massive paws are equipped with claws up to 4 inches long, designed for tearing apart logs and digging through soil, but equally effective at shredding human flesh. An adult black bear possesses the strength to crush a human skull with a single swipe and can deliver a bite force of over 800 pounds per square inch, enough to crack bones like twigs. Wildlife officers have received multiple complaints about Bobo's presence near residential areas, but Mario's insistence that his bear was harmless had prevented any serious intervention. He regularly boasted to neighbors about their special bond, describing how Bobo would visit his porch and even accompany him to the mailbox. These interactions, which Mario saw as proof of their friendship, were actually warning signs of a wild animal that had lost its natural behavioral boundaries. On May 18th, Mario's birthday celebration seemed like the perfect opportunity to showcase his unique relationship with Bobo. As his 3 guests, an old co-worker, her sister, and a local handyman, enjoyed cake and conversation, the massive bear wandered into view with the casual confidence of an animal that had learned to associate humans with food rewards. Mario's decision to approach Bobo with a slice of birthday cake represented the culmination of years of dangerous conditioning. Bears are opportunistic feeders with an acute sense of smell that can detect food from miles away, and Mario's offering of sweet cake activated the same feeding response that drives bears to raid garbage cans and break into campsites. Only this time, the bear wasn't separated by a fence or fear. Bobo reared onto his hind legs before lashing out with one massive paw. The blow struck Mario across the face, sending him sprawling backward as his guests watched in frozen horror. Black bears killed through a combination of crushing bites and powerful claw strikes, using their incredible strength to overpower prey much larger than themselves. Bobo's jaws clamped down on Mario's leg, dragging him toward the tree line with the methodical efficiency of a predator securing its kill. The bear's subsequent attacks targeted Mario's abdomen and chest, tearing through flesh and bone. The 911 call came at 4:34 p.m. from a passerby who heard the screams echoing across the ridge. By the time deputies and wildlife officers arrived 30 minutes later, Mario was already dead, his body torn apart by the animal he had considered family. A single rifle shot ended both the attack and Bobo's life, but the damage was irreversible. Mario's torso had been torn open, his neck partially severed, his face rendered unrecognizable by the bear's powerful claws. The trail of blood and clothing fragments, stretching from the party table to the forest edge, told the story of his final, desperate moments. Mario's funeral was held 3 days later at a small crematorium in Mariposa. Only close family and a few former co-workers attended. In the days that followed, wildlife authorities conducted a formal investigation and issued a public advisory on the dangers of habituating wild animals. The bear's remains were tested and buried off-site, and the county announced plans to review and strengthen local exotic and nuisance wildlife enforcement protocols. Mario's story had ended in carnage among the California pines. Meanwhile, Kentucky would soon witness a mechanic's secret obsession with his hidden Bengal tiger transform a casual family visit into a feeding frenzy that would leave witnesses scarred for life. It was March 9, 2018, as a violent storm swept through southern Scottsville, wind rattling tin roofs and rain pooling in red clay yards. Behind a small house, a flashlight beam sliced through the dark toward a camouflage shed, where Kilo, a 350-pound Bengal tiger, waited silently as laughter from the garage faded into the storm. Within minutes, that laughter would transform into screams that would echo through the hollow. Elijah Brantley was a 29-year-old recluse whose journey from auto mechanic to exotic predator owner had been marked by increasing isolation and dangerous obsessions. Once employed at a small garage outside Bowling Green, he had slowly withdrawn from steady work after a back injury and a falling out with coworkers. Over the next 2 years, Elijah poured his time and dwindling money into a remote lifestyle, one where he could pursue what he called pure control. That mindset would take physical form in the shape of a steel-framed enclosure and a dangerous growing animal few in the area even knew existed. Elijah had constructed the enclosure in secret, a concrete-floored structure welded from scrap panels and wrapped in layers of camo tarps, brush, and plywood. Hidden behind a stand of cedars and positioned downhill from the house, it was all but invisible from the road and overlooked by local authorities. He had no exotic animal license, no fencing inspection, and no veterinary documentation for the tiger's health. The shed had no external signage, no perimeter fence, and no real emergency access. He fed Kilo raw meat, chicken quarters, ground beef, expired pork, obtained through bulk suppliers who likely never asked questions. Elijah believed that feeding the tiger regularly had earned him its trust. Sandy, Elijah's cousin, had once been close to him. She hadn't visited in over a year, but had reached out recently, concerned about his reclusive behavior and rumors from neighbors. That Friday night, she and her boyfriend Drew came to see him, under the pretense of a family check-in, though really it was part intervention, part curiosity. They sat in the garage drinking cheap beer while lightning cracked over the ridge. The metal roof shook with wind gusts and water pooled around the tires of Drew's truck. Around 9:15 p.m., after a lull in the storm, Elijah stood up with a grin and asked if they wanted to see something insane. His tone was casual and joking. Neither Sandy nor Drew realized the seriousness of what he meant. Elijah retrieved a flashlight, zipped up his jacket, and motioned for them to follow. They stepped outside into the mud and walked around the back of the house, their shoes slipping in puddles and wet leaves. The flashlight cut across trees and brush until the beam landed on a sagging tarp that covered what looked like a shed. Kilo was already awake and pacing, the sound of boots in the mud and voices in the dark alerting his predatory instincts. Bengal tigers are apex predators, solitary hunters capable of bringing down animals many times their own size. Males can weigh up to 660 pounds and measure over 10 feet from nose to tail. Their retractable claws can extend over 4 inches, and their bite force exceeds 1,000 pounds per square inch. In the wild, they ambush prey from cover, targeting the neck with a single powerful bite to sever the spinal cord and cause instant death. In captivity, those instincts remain intact, triggered by movement, scent, and opportunity. As Elijah stepped through the unlatched door of the enclosure, he crossed a line that had never truly existed in Kilo's mind. The tiger did not see a caretaker. It saw a moving shape inside its domain, presenting no visible threat. There was no warning growl, no pawing or hesitation. Kilo lunged from the side of the enclosure, his body hitting Elijah with crushing impact. Elijah landed hard on the concrete, his flashlight skittering out of reach. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Kilo's jaws locked onto Elijah's neck with devastating force, the bite crushing vertebrae and severing critical arteries. Sandy screamed. Drew grabbed a rusted crowbar from beside the shed and struck the cage bars, yelling. Kilo paid no attention. The tiger shook Elijah's body, dragging him toward the far end of the shed, where blood quickly pooled under his hind legs. Kilo began feeding, methodically, silently. He tore through fabric and flesh, exposing muscle and ribs. Sandy, panicked, ran back toward the house to get her phone, slipping twice in the mud. Drew remained outside the shed, shouting Elijah's name, unable to look away. Elijah was unresponsive within the first 30 seconds. He was likely dead within a minute. Sandy's 911 call was logged at 9:27 p.m. It took over 20 minutes for law enforcement and wildlife officials to reach the property, slowed by weather and poor road conditions. When officers arrived, Kilo was still crouched over Elijah's remains, showing signs of possession and guarding behavior, ears back, eyes fixed, tail rigid. One wildlife officer prepared a tranquilizer dart, while another took position behind the patrol vehicle. A single dart was fired and struck Kilo in the hindquarter. The tiger growled, backed away slowly, and collapsed under sedation within 3 minutes. The scene that investigators entered was gruesome. Elijah's face was torn beyond recognition. His neck was broken, and his chest cavity had been partially opened. Blood had seeped into the cracks on the concrete floor. Clothing, bone fragments, and shredded meat were scattered in a 6-foot radius. Elijah's funeral was held 5 days later at a private cemetery near Bowling Green. Only a small group of family attended. No obituary was published, and no formal service was conducted. His casket remained closed. The family declined interviews and asked that the details remain private. The tiger Kilo was transferred under sedation to a secure holding facility that night. After a brief observation period, he was relocated to a licensed big cat sanctuary in the western United States. Authorities opened an investigation into how Elijah had acquired and kept the animal, but found no records, receipts, or permits. Without clear violations involving commerce or transportation, no charges were filed posthumously. The shed was dismantled within a week. The land was quietly listed for sale by Elijah's estate. There was no local press coverage beyond an initial police blotter entry. State officials issued a public advisory about exotic animal ownership, but stopped short of passing new restrictions. Thanks for watching. If today's tragedies piqued your interest, the next video features more deadly animals. See you there!